Welcome back, everyone. Hope everyone's got a fresh cup of tea or biscuit or whatever they're having for the second half. So we've got Dave Solly from Natural England with us here to talk about biodiversity net gain. Thank you, Dave. We've been talking about this for a while, I think, in terms of having you here. So I'm glad you can make it, and over to you, really.
Thanks very much, James. Appreciated. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, we've mentioned this session for some time back when a number of us met at Severn Valley Country Park in the days we could go. I'm appreciated it's taken a while for us to get there, but I hope you'll find this session useful. We did then a bit of a straw poll to get a feel that this was a concept that was relatively new to many of you, but we did set some homework to go away and have a chat with planning colleagues. So I hope you've had the opportunity to do that. But the purpose of this afternoon is to bring to you a bit of insight into the concept, context for it, the policy drivers, and including the Environment Bill, which will help cement it for the future, and also then to take you through a bit of a practical experience, sharing of practical experience and the application of it. I'm very pleased to say that I've been joined this afternoon by two colleagues who've experienced in this. To introduce them first, we'll be speaking first will be Dr. Nick White, Principal Advisor in Natural England for Net Gain, who's been leading the team who developed the concept and the evidence base underpinning it, and more recently been advising DEFRA as they draft the policy and content for the Environment Bill. Nick's not new to this world. He's been previous background in green infrastructure and biodiversity, and he's not an ecologist, but he's worked in other sectors like health and museums and the charitable sector, etc. So, and then following Nick, we're pleased to welcome David Lowe, the team leader in Ecology, Historic Environment and Landscape with Warwickshire County Council. And has been a leading officer for them in their 2012-2014 biodiversity offsetting pilot, working with DEFRA and covering Warwickshire, Coventry and Solihull. So quite a lot of different experience from both the policy context side and also the practical side. The way we're going to run this is Nick's going to present to you first, and then we'll have a quick pause, a brief pause for a few initial questions. Then we'll hand over to David and pause at the end for deeper questions and discussion. So I hope that works for everybody. So I think Alison or James, you're going to be in charge of the slides. Perhaps I can hand over at this point to Nick and invite you to take the stage.
Many thanks, Dave, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting us along. As Dave mentioned, I'm the Principal Advisor for Net Gain in Natural England, and I'm just going to quickly run through a bit of an update in terms of what Biodiversity Net Gain is, the state of current play in respect of policy, how the metric that underpins a lot of this approach, how that works very briefly and where that's at, and also just to touch on some work that's being done to develop a British standard for biodiversity net gain as well. Happy to take some questions straight after that, and then segue across to David Lowe, who's been basically delivering biodiversity net gain in Warwickshire for a number of years now, and to talk about his experience on that. So next slide, please. So when we're talking about biodiversity, what are we actually talking about here? So essentially, net gain is an approach to development or land management that aims to leave the natural environment in a measurably better state. So it's something that's creating a kind of legacy outcome, making things better than they were before. Next slide, please. On the next slide, please.
Oh, what's happened?
Oops. Disappearing slide. Just give it a second. Let's bring the slides back up again.
Oh, do you want the next one?
Please, yeah. Brilliant, the Lego one. Thank you. Just go back to the Lego one, please. So why is this important? I like to try and use Lego to illustrate things because, as Dave mentioned, I'm not an ecologist. But essentially, so what net gain is so you've got a situation in the top of the screen where an area of, in this instance, Lego woodland has been lost. It's gone up for housing. So the nature that was there to start with has been lost. And that was very common. And then we moved through to a kind of an approach that's aiming to try and achieve no net loss. So essentially to try and replace the nature that had been impacted by the development with an equivalent amount post-development. And that's fine, except we're living.
We've lost Nick.
Oh, we have. Nick, if you can hear us. Okay. Nick, if you can hear us, we've lost you.
Nick, you're showing as muted in the participants list. If you can hear us.
Okay. Right, Nick has just put in the chat. The system says he's been muted, but he's unmuted on the phone. So is there, James, anything you can do with the system?
I don't have the power to unmute him, I don't think, unfortunately. I don't know if Alison can as the meeting host. Can you, Alison?
I'll try.
Nick, keep speaking just until we can hear you.
I can't see him on the list. Is he on one?
He's at the very bottom. There's White, Nicholas, and then is he on the phone? So he might be one of those phone numbers.
He'll probably have dialed in on the phone. If you perhaps unmute the phone numbers for now.
I can't unmute them.
Can you wave to him and get some attention?
Right, you'd have technology.
Fabulous. Right, I'm wondering if we possibly have to consider doing this slightly the other way around then, and perhaps see if we can shift to David and then come back to Nick when we can get him back, if that's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps if he leaves and rejoins, it will reset.
Yeah. And that's what he's just doing. It's Dave Lowe.
Hello, David. Okay, so perhaps if you can just bear with us for a second while Nick tries to dial in, and I have to say Lego is a great way of showing the concept, something that anybody of any age can grasp, and hopefully puts it across quite simply. So just, bear with us a moment. I think one thing to do after this call, hopefully this will give you some further insights to enable you to have a better conversation with your planning colleagues about the opportunities associated with this, which both Nick and David will tell you more about. I can see that somebody's waiting in the lobby. If somebody's able to let them back in.
Hopefully he's back.
And are you back?
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Welcome.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm not quite sure what happened there. So back to the Lego. Why is that important? So why are we talking about net gains? So essentially, nature's in a state of continual decline. That's obviously bad for wildlife. It has implications for us as people there as well. So biodiversity net gain is a paradigm shift, because at the moment you can be completely compliant with most planning requirements, but actually your development would achieve a net loss in terms of nature. So we're talking about a significant shift to try and create a positive legacy for nature. So moving on to the next slide, please. And it also comes with, so net gain also comes with a lot of kind of useful wider benefits as well, in terms of both for planning authorities and for developers themselves. Firstly, it can help as an approach to de-risk the planning process and make the consenting process smoother, because it takes a lot of the subjectivity out of considerations around the natural environment. It can help contribute towards the kind of placemaking agenda in terms of improving the quality of places where people live and work. As many of you on the webinar will know anyway, the provision of extra green infrastructure and the funding for that can also help to increase resilience, both for communities and also for critical infrastructure as well, so it can help fund that. It comes with reputational benefits. And finally, and of potential interest to yourselves, it also potentially offers a significant income generation opportunity as well, because it comes with a long-term funding tail attached to it, which could be used to invest in the biodiversity uplift of existing parks and green spaces, or to help establish new ones. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Somebody keeps messing around with my said someone else had taken control of it then. Don't know what that meant.
Just wait for this slide, please. Excellent. Thank you. So at the moment, Biodiversity Net Gain is something that planning authorities can implement now, and Dave will talk in a minute about the work that he's been doing for a few years now in Warwickshire, but it's already embedded within the National Planning Policy Framework, and it was set out in terms of the approach to take more recently in terms of the updated planning practice guidance that came out last year. When MHCRG published their National Design Guide as well for housing just before the election last year, it also made a number of references to biodiversity net gain in that. And then outside the world of town and country planning, net gain is also embedded in a number of national policy statements as well for the major infrastructure around new nuclear and water, and has the ambition to really try and strengthen some of those as well. But moving on to the next slide. The focus for a lot of the attention at the moment is around the Environment Bill, which went into Parliament in January this year, which sets to make mandatory biodiversity net, which sets out to make biodiversity net gain a mandatory requirement for all developments going through the Town and Country Planning Act. Now, this applies to England only, but what the bill proposes is that all developments through that act achieve a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain, and that's calculated using an updated biodiversity metric. It requires that those habitats be secured for at least 30 years, irrespective of whether the net gain is being delivered on the site or somewhere nearby or further afield. And so that requires that funding is in place to achieve that. It emphasises an approach that looks to net gain to be delivered on your site in the first instance, so encouraging developers to integrate it into their site design. Where that can't happen, though, there's emphasis on trying to deliver it locally, and particularly through the enhancements of existing spaces or the creation of new habitats nearby. And only if that's not possible can a developer pay into a national scheme to purchase a biodiversity credit, which would allow them to deliver their net gain delivered further afield. For any land, including local authority land, that will be looking to deliver net gain on it, there'll be a requirement for that land to register onto the national register. That's not yet been established, it's in the process of being so, but that's to make sure you don't get the same piece of land being used multiple times to deliver different people's net gains on. As an approach, although the bill's in Parliament at the moment, it's been impacted by COVID, so it's likely that the actual legislation won't come into force for about 2 years after the bill's cleared, so we're probably looking at either late 2022 or early 23 for it to become a mandatory requirement. It doesn't change existing legal protections for biodiversity, so it doesn't change anything around existing protections on protected sites or irreplaceable habitats. And just to stress, it only covers the Town and Country Planning Act, so it doesn't apply to nationally significant infrastructure projects. It doesn't apply to marine. Obviously, it's less relevant in the Midlands than elsewhere. Next slide, please. So there's three themes really embedded within the mandatory approach. Firstly, that this idea that it's measurable and everybody's using a single consistent metric to measure that. Secondly, there's this clear kind of spatial hierarchy embedded in the approach, so the emphasis on trying to deliver gains within a development site firstly. If that's not possible, then the emphasis on doing that locally and delivering it into areas of strategic importance for that authority. And then finally, there's an emphasis on, obviously, an expectation that biodiversity gain is delivered, so benefits for nature, but also a recognition that for this to work, it's got to be seen to deliver benefits to people, and also that the approach should help smooth the process for planning authorities and developers as well, so and to be a more kind of objective process than perhaps current planning can be. Next slide, please. So as I said, the bill came into Parliament in January of this year. It got as far as the public bill committee stage when it was impacted by delays due to COVID. It hasn't come back to committee at this point in time. It's probably not likely to come back to committee until September. So at this rate, it would mean an estimated royal assent in 2021, in spring 2021. There is this 2-year transition built into it, so that means that the mandatory approach wouldn't become a legal requirement until 2023. But as I mentioned, a number of authorities are doing net gain anyway, and Dave will talk about the approach that he's been embedded in Warwickshire. And legislation is still being worked on, just in terms of the secondary legislation associated with the bill as well. So it's still quite a work in progress in terms of the mandatory approach. Next slide, please. So the Biodiversity Net Gain is based on the use of a common and consistent metric that all will be required to use. At the moment, it's a beta version. It's described as Biodiversity Metric 2, and it uses habitats as a proxy measure for wider biodiversity. So it doesn't ask you to measure species or things like that. It just uses habitats, and that includes all terrestrial type habitats. So that's everything from green roofs and walls through to high distinctive habitats such as chalk grassland and things like that. It also applies to intertidal as well as terrestrial habitats, and includes linear features such as rivers, the riparian zone, and lines of trees and hedgerows as well. And it works by getting 5 bits of information that you input into a tool, and then it calculates everything in terms of the biodiversity unit value of the scheme. So, and that information is the size of the habitat, its condition, how distinctive the habitat is, where the habitat is located. So is it in an area that the planning authority has identified as being important to nature? And then finally, how connected the site is ecologically as well. Next slide, please. The way, as I said, net gain is the emphasis originally is on trying to achieve gains on site, and so there's opportunities through doing that to both buffer and connect to existing green space. We use development to help increase connectivity in terms of green infrastructure within areas, but also there's obviously benefits in terms of greening developments in helping to reduce some of the pressures on existing green space as well. So trying to ensure that you don't have development leading to a large influx of demand onto additional demands onto existing green space. When net gain can't be delivered on site, then the policy and the metric actually seeks to target net gain delivery into areas that are deemed to be strategically important by that planning authority. And that could be because they're in a green infrastructure strategy or been picked up through other policies. So it provides a way of targeting investment to enhance existing sites in the local area, or also to be used to address deficiencies in the provision and access to nature in places as well. So actually use it as a funding tool to increase investment and provide new green spaces in areas as well. Next slide, please. So this is all, as I said, a lot of this is determined by the metric, and the metric has been out to consultation last year. We are just going through the process of finalising this metric, and it will come out in its final version in December of this year. It comes with a free calculation tool as well, so it's quite simple to use. At the same time, we'll also be producing a version of the metric that's intended for smaller schemes, so one specifically for sites of 10 units or less. And that will be coming out as a beta version in December this year. I'm moving it on. So the final thing I just wanted to mention was some work that's been doing with the British Standard Institute, which is to develop a new British standard for biodiversity net gain. So the next slide, please. So this standard, which is ES 8683, will apply both to development and to land management practices. It's intended to be used for project specifications, to embed within the procurement process, and potentially also to reference within planning conditions as well. Next slide, please. It's a process standard. So what the standard does is it considers all the stages of the development life cycle, from feasibility and optioneering through to impact assessment and design, implementation, and then the management, maintenance and monitoring of sites. And basically sets out how to do that in a way that will give confidence that a biodiversity net gain outcome is likely to be achieved. It doesn't actually tell you if biodiversity net gain has been achieved, but that could take many years. But it's designed to help project managers and landscape architects and others ensure that they're following a process that will give confidence that that outcome is going to be achieved. And it's also being written in a way that hopefully people could be accredited against it should they choose to do so. It's just completed a consultation exercise, and we're hoping that the standard will get published either at the end of this year or early next year. And I think that's the end of the slides. Yes, thank you. So that's my contact details. Apologies for the dropping out of the sound earlier on. I want to take a pause for any questions briefly, and then I'll move us on to David Lowe.
Yes, I think we've got a couple of questions in the chat come through. Nick, I don't know if you want to address. So Lucy in Esther was asking about net gain relating to HS2 and whether this becomes relevant to that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So HS2, to be fair to them, were one of the first big infrastructure projects that said, actually, we need to move beyond no net loss. And they set an aspiration at the time for no net. So they moved beyond net loss. They set an aspiration for no net loss. And that was a number of years ago. And they were the first big project to do that. Actually, most projects now are committing themselves to net gain. So HS2 are somewhat behind the curve now compared to other projects. And so we've been working with them to try and encourage them to move beyond no net loss and actually to kind of set the bar slightly higher to net gain. It doesn't apply to irreplaceable habitats, so that wouldn't include the impacts they have on ancient woodlands, for example. But yeah, we'd be very keen and supportive of encouraging them to move beyond no net loss to this net gain position, because other projects such as Network Rail and Highways England are moving in that direction. But it's the subject of a continuing conversation with us and HS2 at the moment.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then Richard had asked about net gain and how this differs from SEAL or Section 106.
So this would be entirely, so the mandatory approach would be entirely separate to that. So it wouldn't use SEAL or Section 106 in terms of how the monies actually necessarily get transferred. Equally, obviously, they're intended to address and deliver kind of wider benefits to a place, to recognise the impact the development is having on that place. The net gain requirement is specific to the biodiversity impacts, and so there will be a kind of a bespoke mechanism to allow for the transfer of monies from the developer to planning authority and then ultimately out to land manager. So it's not intended to replace SEAL or Section 106, but to be additional to that. And it becomes a kind of standard planning condition, essentially, that everyone has to deliver a biodiversity net gain in order for their project to get planning approval.
Okay, great. And then the last one at the moment was from Lucy, again in Leicestershire, about just some comments about how site allocations are prioritised, suggesting that some of that is reliant on old data. And then she asks about the different scientific methods for providing a rationale for determining connectivity, and that different areas will use different methodologies. So is that a risk to consistency, you know, being sort of put at risk there?
Yes, and it's one of the things. So at the moment, the metric is a beta version, and it does ask people to consider ecological connectivity within it. we're currently reviewing how best to address that whole question of ecological connectivity, precisely for the reasons that have been identified as well. So all I can say at this stage is kind of watch this space. But it's a fair point. We want to have a consistent approach to how people are using it. Because part of the idea is that everyone around the country is applying things consistently into a common format, and so if you start to get introduced a significant degree of variability, that obviously takes that away. Having said that, I know Dave's done a huge amount of work in Warwickshire looking at modelling ecological connectivity across the county and flows as well. So I think there's a lot we can learn from what's been done in Warwickshire as well.
Okay. Great, thanks, Nick. I think that's it for the questions now, but just to remind people, if you've got questions during the next section, please do put them in the chat.
Thanks, James, and thank you, Nick, for the presentation. Perhaps that, as you said, that segues nicely into to David Lowe's session. So perhaps, David, can we hand over to you now to introduce yourself and continue with your thoughts on the practical implementation of this?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for asking me to be here. In that sense, I see there's Matt and there's Simon, one from Nuneaton and Budworth and Coventry, respectively, on board. So I'll be careful what I say too much. But Chris Warman, I've noticed, has gone, so that's rugby sorted. Would you like me to take control as such and do a slide, or should I just nod at appropriate time or say next slide? I don't mind which.
You can take control if you want.
Oh yeah, County Council taking control. Okay, I'll have a go and see what happens. I press the button, see what goes on. I have to do this maybe. Tink. Yep, started it. So yeah, that's me, basically. Basically, the districts and unitaries at the bottom were part of the 2012-2014 pilot. And Solihull have their own ecologist, and Simon is Coventry, and Nuneaton and Bedworth basically do their own biodiversity offsetting sites finding. But I'm still trying to advise each and every one of the districts and unitaries that come into Warwickshire, Coventry, Solihull, because it was based on our GI strategy, sub-regional green infrastructure strategy, which I wrote, which embedded biodiversity net gain and biodiversity offsetting, as it was known then, into that document as a core evidence base. But I'm not going to go into that element of it. I'm going to actually go into the parks side of it, because you have a parks forum and how we've used the biodiversity offsetting on as case examples. So again, that was a project board which we did for the DEFRA pilot, and that's where Warwickshire is, just in case someone forgets where we are. Chronologically, this is where we started from. I wrote a GI strategy in 2009 to 2012. In that time when the NPPF was coming out, didn't quite know what it was going to say, so that was exciting times, I can tell you. And then eventually, luckily, knowingly in some respects, the NPPF had everything we needed to hook the green infrastructure strategy onto and into, and also biodiversity net gain was mentioned within that 2012 NPPF. So we implemented it into policies almost immediately. So by 2013 and 14, all our districts and county plans had net gain statements within it. So, and we first started getting our biodiversity offset money in 2015-16, where we entered the implementation stage. We're now moving on to more regulation, as we've set up a market in Warwickshire, but more on that in another talk if necessary. What is biodiversity net gain? Nick covered it well. It's basically, in essence, that you value the future habitat, the existing habitat, you minus one from the other, and you get a gain or a loss. If you make a development makes a loss, they have to find an offset site, or in this case, pay Warwickshire County Council on behalf of the districts X amount of money, and we will find a site for them. The financial contribution element is so that the developer is not held up for a year looking for a site. They could just get us to do it for them. And that's governed within the section 106 to answer Lucy's question on the chat. So Nick's gone off for a metric. There's a national metric, looks something like that. He says it's simple to fill in, but I will not say too much on that one. And ultimately, this is our goal, just to put it in sub-regional green strategy. The purple are the sites that we are about to do or have done biodiversity offsetting on. And these are grassland sites where there are The lighter colours are basically, lighter colour brown is where there's 5 to 19 hectares of wildflower grassland of quite flowers, more than rich ones in Warwickshire. And you can see they're quite fragmented. And the dark brown ones is where there's 20 hectares or more wildflower grassland in Warwickshire, in that square. So you can see our grasslands are basically stuffed, they're fragmented, and the purple is where we've done offsets at the moment to try and join it up. So it's beginning to work. And by 2030, we envisage something like this, with actual sites being bought in green to join up. Bless you. Oh, I've stopped presenting for some reason. I pressed the wrong button and I clicked. I'll come back, or can someone put it back on? Sorry. A jittery hand. As someone said in one of the things, it's quite easy to press the wrong button, I think. Apologies. Do you want me to take control and move on?
Yeah, would you?
Yeah, there you go. I promise not to try and press the wrong button again. I'll just sing to myself a little while. So county view was the last one. What we're trying to do now is actually look at cities and urban spaces. So this is Kenilworth, for example, and we're working with Spot It to try and fill in the rural, the urban areas with satellite imagery to find out where parks can play a really good part of that connectivity. But we will try and use the same process for prioritising those parks, if possible, for nature conservation, so we can actually join up and get wildlife right into the centre of these areas.
David, I can't see your slides. I don't know whether anyone else can.
Yeah.
I can.
I can.
I can.
No, I'm the only one.
Sorry. Do you want me to stop? Do you want me to stop?
No.
Sure, do you want to take control, or?
No, I've got a backup.
You're going to back, okay, that's fine. We secure biodiversity offsetting generally through Section 39 Wildlife Countryside Act agreements, where they are 30-year agreements, and they're based on a full format Natural England management plan, because I was trained with Derby Wildlife Trust, and that's what I used to write. So basically, we have management plans to secure that 30-year interest. But I hasten to say, the local authorities, we have a NERC duty, so I don't have any management plan in my mind will do for the local authority, because once a local authority is suggesting they're going to manage the land for nature conservation purposes, the NERC Act suggests that they will continue to, and if they don't, there are ways and means the local public can shout at them for not doing so. So Cherry Orchard, for example, is the one right in the middle of Kenilworth. We've done our own Warwickshire biological assessment on it, and it comes out with X amount of units, 3.57, I think, on this one. And we were able then to match that up with a developer contribution to pay for the management of that, which is a local wildlife site of amenity grassland and nice and semi-improved grassland. We're going to enhance it to basically, over time, UK priority habitat. No waste sites. It's owned by Warwickshire County Council as an ex-waste site, and there's a management schedule attached to it. That's one, and we took DEF around there to show, and it's about year 3 and 4, and the compliments we've had back was, I've never seen so many butterflies in my life. So I think it generally is working. We've also come the costs about Cherry Orchard, and we have some ideas of how much it's going to cost to do the 30-year management period. The property, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And questions about to come in. I can hear someone typing. Brighton Country Park. Just blasting through these really quickly to give you an idea. The slides will be shown around, so you can see what we put in it. 21 units can be generated from 2 fields on White and Pools Country Park, generating quite a few units. We pulled quite a few contributions together to pay for that contribution, which ended up being that much. So it gives you an idea of some sums we're potentially getting to enhance biodiversity on a 30-year period, all index linked, you'll notice. So there's a bit of contingency built into that inflation index as such. And these are all secured through Section 106 financial contributions to County Council. One in Rugby, Chris has gone, unless he's come back again. This is one we're about to start up, we hope, in Rugby. We've done the management plan, we've done the calculation of costs of how much it's going to be, and so far this site is unmanaged in any real fashion, and we're looking to bring that management back into it. So that's another site which we're looking to work on, and that would be 15.7 units gain out of that one. Kilsby Meadow, there's a management plan we've attached to this one, not a full-blown management plan as such. We're trying to do it as Rugby would like, so that it's easier for them to employ their maintenance contractors, and trying to fit it into how they produce management plans for their parks, etc. And we'll try and do that with all the ones that we have, make it easy to understand and how to use it. Warwick District Council, Reginald Green's Flood Meadow. These are 2 flood meadows which had semi-approved poor grassland on them, and we're looking to enhance them, etc. Same sort of things, but they were flood meadows and well used by public, as you can see by some of the desire lines that go through them, etc. Again, this is a joint one where Warwick District Council said, OK, yeah, can you help us manage it now, as we should do? And can you also create the wildflower grasslands for the first 3 or 4 years? And then we'll pass it, and we'll just do the normal management thereafter. So the bits in green are the payments that go to Warwickshire County Council. We're retaining to maintain it and prepare the ground and do the creation costs. And the purple ones is where Warwick District Council will be picking up the money to then maintain it at a quite low rate, because they just need to tweak their management and not do extensive stuff. The interesting one about this one is that, talking about connectivity, this site is more of a social site. It's more where people actually can see how biodiversity offsetting works, to try and be more to get the message across of how biodiversity net gain could happen. It's in a non-strategic area where we don't really need any grasslands. There's not much around, so it's much more of a social type one as an offset. And if anyone's interested, we're holding all you need to know about delivering biodiversity net gain subject to COVID in November time-ish, where we've got a doodle poll for anyone who wants to come and join us for 3 days in Llandudno, our Welsh office, to see, and we'll hopefully go through all these aspects. It's mainly towards planning and planners, etc. But we might do one if anyone wishes for parks, etc. if you wish. And I think that's going to be me. I'll just move it on. Questions, yeah, so I'll stop presenting. And that'll probably make it all turn off. Oh, there you go. Control's been taken back. Fantastic. Thank you.
Great, brilliant. Thank you for that. Dave, was there anything you wanted to say to wrap that up at all before we go into the questions?
Yeah, I was just fighting to get myself off mute. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, David, for your presentation. Perhaps before we go into questions and discussion, perhaps I could just bring Nick back in if you're still with us. And Nick, do you want to say anything about the Biodiversity Credit Scheme pilots?
Yeah, just so I alluded very briefly to this idea that net gain is intended to be delivered on site, or if it can't be, then delivered locally. There is, however, a third option, which is this idea of buying biodiversity credits essentially from the government, effectively from the government. It's intended to only be used where there isn't a market available, so where there's no willing landowners locally able to deliver net gain. So where a system such as Dave was talking about for Warwickshire isn't really in place. And there's going to be some, there's a call for pilots that's out at the moment. That call is not to look at habitat creation. It's really just to explore whether there's organisations who might be interested in offering themselves to work as pilots for the scheme. And at this stage, it will just be doing some work to help them undertake some baseline analysis and to see what's the what might be required to get them ready to start doing some habitat creation work. So if anyone is interested, there are some more details I can send through. But as I said, it's primarily aimed at areas or projects that are in locations where it's felt there's not likely to be landowners who are interested themselves in delivering net gain into a market. And ideally, it's also aimed at opportunities that could deliver kind of landscape scale benefits as well. So looking at quite large habitat opportunities. But I can send through some details separately if that would be of interest.
Thanks, Nick. And actually, I've got an email address for that, which I'm going to put into the chat now, that if you are interested in more details, send a note to this email address and they'll send back details back to you. So that's now on the chat. Over to questions. James, I'm trying to get my questions to work. So is there any chance you could just help with any that are in the chat at the moment?
We've had quite a number of requests for the slides. So just to reassure people, we'll make those available on the Midlands Forum website within a few days of the meeting. So Lucy has asked a question about how to assess what was needed on local wildlife sites. You know, they've got thousands, she says, in Leicestershire. Did you only assess, public land, or how do you go about that process?
That was one for me. I've put a quick answer back on that one. For that particular site, we actually involved the local wildlife site officers because in their site report, they say what recommendations they would have to enhance it. So basically, we just took upon those recommendations and put it into our biodiversity offset management plan for wastes, who actually owned that site. I've only shown you the park ones, which we've done. We've actually got 5 or 6 private sites with landowners and farmers, etc., which we've already signed up Section 39 Wildlife Consent Act agreements with. But I just focused on the parks ones for this one. We've actually also got a very large estate who's got put 20 hectares of wildflower enhancement into the system as on phase 1, as they call it. They said they've got another 60 to 100 hectares they could put in afterwards if it's a successful business sort of test. The land agent is also a planning agent. So they're actually wanting to sell the units themselves. So that's when I say I'm moving into regulation phase at the moment, is that every time they sell a unit, they have to tell me as part of a Section 39 Wildlife Consent agreement, and they then pay me some readies to manage and monitor and look and regulate them as such. So I'm beginning to get regulatory payments in, but that's a more towards how to run biodiversity offsetting, whereas today I'm trying to focus on what park managers can actually do and the steps they may need to take just to put their own land, as it were, and offer them up internally, as it were, to the internal market for offsetting. It's a huge complex thing. We're still learning. We started in 2012 and we're nowhere finished it yet. But as soon as we come across a hurdle, we just either knock it down or work our way around it or jump over it, one or the other. And it's interesting. It's great fun.
And you've mentioned there, Dave, Solly, that is about a call for pilot projects.
Yeah, that's right. That's the call. The email address to contact. So I put up there in the chat as well. James, do you want me to pick up Colin Horton's question?
Yeah, great if you can. So that was about landscape resistance models and circuit theory. This is starting to go over my head a bit here, I have to confess.
That's fine. Pass that. I'll actually pass that on to David and Nick if I can. So please feel free.
Well, Warwickshire's done lots of connectivity modelling. We didn't use resistant pathways modelling, otherwise known as sensor node, but I won't get into too much detail. We use Condatis. It's a Liverpool University free open source software, and we have tons and tons of data in Warwickshire where every field and every hedge has been surveyed, and is surveyed 20% of it surveyed every year. So we have a huge, massive, whopping data set, and I've left you all those slides out of my presentations. You can have a look at the SIEM presentations if you want to Google that sometime. There's I've done talks to them on that side of things. But if you want to have a look at maps.warwickshire, I'll put it into chat if you want. But maps.warwickshire.gov.uk/green infrastructure, you'll see that we've mapped connectivity throughout the whole of the UK. For anyone to use if they so wish at 2 kilometre squares using land cover data from Natural England because of HS2 and phase 2 side of things. They gave me the whole data set, so we just did it for fun. And we've also done it for Warwickshire more closely to see how Warwickshire fits into the wider landscape of the West Midlands, so that every planning decision we make for the districts and every offset site we put in you can then locate it in a place where it's going to have national significance as well as local and or regional. But maps, I'll put it in maps.warwickshire.gov.uk. I'll put it into chaps.
Great. And then final, I think, is the one from Peter, just saying about the Warwickshire examples were improved as a result of offsetting payments off-site. But interested to know what might have happened on the development sites that funded them. Would anything have taken place on those as well, or was it purely offsetting, I suppose, is what he's asking?
One thing I neglected to say at the beginning, Warwickshire County Council has service level agreements with all the districts apart from Nuneaton and Bedworth and North Warwickshire to look at all the planning applications. So we look at every single planning application that comes through, and we basically ensure that the mitigation hierarchy is applied. So any good habitats retained and enhanced, avoided first, retained and enhanced where possible, mitigated if that's a term you can actually use in Ecology a lot, and as a final resource, it's compensated for. So all the payments we get have gone through the mitigation hierarchy, and we only offset grasslands with grasslands, woodlands with woodlands, and other such as arable we can put with anything we like. At the moment, great question use.
Great. Okay. And we just got a thanks there from Matt to say well done to the team for working on this nationally and securing the money, that the scale of the money you've talked about, from big improvement from securing a couple of bird boxes in a tree in the past. So yeah, great work.
We've basically pulled in around about 2.7 million at the moment.
Wow, impressive figures. Okay, great. So unless there's any other questions, Dave, do you want to any final comments?
I think that's from me. It's just a big thank you to David and Nick for the time joining us this afternoon. Is there any? Do either of you have any final thoughts before we hand back?
Only for me, just apologies for the gremlins earlier on, but I hope people were able to make sense of what I said, and do feel free to get back in touch if any further questions as well.
Yeah, we can always come back and deal with things again in a future session if need be. So leave it there. Thanks, James.
Yeah, thank you very much, all of you.
And similarly, if anyone wants to contact me anytime, I'm highly traceable and happy to answer any questions that anyone wants.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks all, much appreciated. So just to wrap up today then, so we've got any other business, which I'll let Alison just run through quickly, but also if anyone's got any final questions on this or the topics from today or any other topics, then please stick them in the chat, or if you've got topics for future meetings, future webinars, please stick them in the chat as well if there's a burning issue you'd like us to cover or topic you want addressed in the future. So Alison, do you want to take us through the AOB?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone, and Dave for helping to put all that together. If everyone could complete an evaluation on today's webinar, that's really helpful for us. Thank you. So that's the first thing. We had a really positive feedback last month, and most people found that the presentations met and exceeded their their enjoyment, and they were useful topics to cover. So thank you for that. Just for anyone who hasn't paid their subscription, if they could do that as soon as possible, please, so we can wind up the membership for this year. And a reminder that your membership includes access to LI Campus. So all the members to date have been emailed an access code. We have funded that for the next 12 months. So you get access to all their presentations, previous conferences that we've run in partnership with them. And also our recordings are on our website. It normally takes us a week or so to get them up there, but all our previous presentations will be available on our website, and this one in about 7 days. So that's that. The next slide, please, Liz. Yeah, and our next large event is a conference in partnership with the Landscape Institute, which will be in November. So we'll be communicating with you about that, but we are also reaching out to anyone who's interested in a sponsorship package for that event. So just inbox me if that's something that you're interested in further details on. We've got sort of key sponsors and support sponsorship as well. So it'd be really great to hear from anyone who's interested in that. Thanks, Liz. The Landscape Institute have just asked us to put a call out as well. They have some awards. I do understand that I think you have to be a member actually to apply for this award. So that's the Excellence in Landscape and Parks Management. So they're very keen to hear from good parks projects. So if you are a member and it's something you're interested in applying, they've extended the deadline to the 23rd of July, and the link is on the screen there. Thank you. Just a note, and thanks to Mark, who from the API, he couldn't make the live session, but I think his presentation was really helpful. But they are lobbying government for funding for play. So that's just their link there and their website, if that's something you want more information on. We had a contact via Twitter from a touring theatre company who were looking for outside venues, particularly in the Midlands. So I don't know the organisation, but I agreed to pass that on for you. So if you're looking for something, yet another challenge to take on this summer, there's one for you.
Or perhaps if anyone has hosted the Pantaloons, they can tell us what it all is about.
Thank you. And just the next date of the next webinar, we're just finalising the agenda for that. But again, as James said, if you've got anything of interest, anything that you particularly want, please put that into the evaluation, and we'll do our very best to try and secure presentations on that topic. And the very last one, this was sent today for all of you who are apse members. I understand this is a free seminar for all those who are members on reimagining the future of parks. So there's information there, and obviously apse can give you more details if you're interested in that. So that's it from me. Thanks, James.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alison. So thank you again. Massive thanks to all our speakers today, to API, to our panel, and to all the chaps from Natural England. Really appreciate it. So as Alison said, next webinar is the 13th of August. So look out for an agenda and a link in your inboxes in due course. And please remember the evaluation once again. If you just take a minute to fill that in, that really helps us. As you remember, we're lottery funded this project at the moment. So yeah, and final comments, Liz?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Really good session. We had a bit of a chat with the Landscape Institute the other day about the conference in November, and they want to use a platform that I've never used before called Hopin. And I know I've had problems with Zoom, or where our IT services just won't let me download it at all. So the idea of using another platform for a sort of a webinar session, an online conference, concerns me a little bit. But what I wanted to do was have a bit of a show of hands from people to see whether they would be happy to use Hopin as a platform. I don't think it's negotiable. So, you know, if we can't get in, we have to use our own devices rather than our work devices. So that's another option that we can look at. But they have said that you don't download this platform. It's just, you know, a bit like Zoom. You can just sort of take part in it rather than having to download it. So could I have a bit of a show of hands from people to see whether they would be happy to use Hopin as the platform for the conference?
Liz, can I perhaps just chip in, because I've joined one of the events on Hopin previously, and it managed to get in from my now slightly geriatric Natural England computer, so it can be made to work. I think it was more the issue that I had at times was the bandwidth causing the Wheel of Doom to appear and slow down. So it does work, if it's any help to know.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
I think that'll be a platform or piece of software number 8 I've used since lockdown began. Liz. So yeah, go on. Why not?
Bring it on. Great. That's it from me.
Okay. Thanks all. Brilliant. Thanks all. We hope to see you again on the 13th of August. Cheerio.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.
Hi, Helga. Who's got those lorries going by?
It's me. I have a buzz every 7 minutes.
A bus.
Yeah.
Hi there, Alison. It's David of
Hi,
Lantra.
David.
Okay,
Yes, how are you?
good, thank you. I was just going to drop you a note, but I might as well have a quick chat with you. Just to say, really, obviously, yeah, when we initially were talking about the potential of Lantra maybe doing last month, obviously I was then furloughed, which I think you realised. So I think the notes